Hi, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Fierce and Sober. My name is Jeremy. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a representative of EHN Canada. If you're new to EHN, we are a nationwide network of treatment centers for addiction, trauma, and mental health. We have facilities located in British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia. We offer high-quality inpatient, outpatient, and online treatment programs. For more information, please visit our website at www.ehncanada.com. Just in terms of housekeeping, everyone is on mute, and cameras are off for today's webinar, but please feel free to use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions for today's panelists. As well, if you don't wish to see the chat preview, please click the up arrow next to the chat box and unclick the chat preview option. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending out a copy of the recording as well as additional resources sometime mid to late next week, along with your CEU certificate. Please remember that this is a professional and inclusive space, and offensive commentary will not be accepted nor tolerated. We have representation today in both Toronto and Calgary. Toronto is located on the traditional territory of several nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. It is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. Calgary is located on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, the Tsuut'ina and the Iai Nakota Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. If you are new to this work and want to find out whose land you're on or grew up on, check out www.native-land.ca. Many more of you may be physically present elsewhere, and I encourage everyone to share whose land, where applicable, you are on. Now, to get to today's lovely panelists, I am so excited about this one. We have Kyle Kennery, a lovely EHN Canada alumni that graduated from Bellwood Health Services in Toronto, Ontario, and is a youth counselor as well. We have Rahim Thawer, who is a 2S LGBTQ+ psychotherapist and consultant. And then we have the lovely Kaos, who is a drag artist from Calgary, Alberta, that is sober. And you might know them from Canada's Drag Race Season 3. Let's get to this phenomenal panel.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you. This is super awesome.
We're going to talk all things fierce and sober. So we will get right into it to basically just get queer perspectives about sobriety, queerness, and everything inside and outside of that spectrum. So we'll get involved. Raheem, I would really like to get started, just if you want to introduce yourself and kind of discuss what made you want to get involved in the work that you do.
Sure. So my name is Rahim Thawer. My pronouns are he and him. I'm trained as a social worker and I'm a psychotherapist based in Toronto, but in a virtual world, I just see clients from everywhere now. From the beginning, like the very beginning of my career, I was really interested in social justice. I was interested in building community and queer community in particular. And I knew that I liked the idea of therapy and counseling. So I just kind of married those things together. And for me, one of my first jobs out after my undergrad was at the Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention. And it was very queer. That's when I feel like I first became a professional gay. And I loved the feeling. And I was like, my workplace needs to be like this all the time. I need to be around queer people. We need to talk about queer issues, and just like celebrate that and work through it, So it's always been important to me to create that kind of space that's queer.
I love that. Thank you so much. Kyle, would you like to introduce yourself and kind of discuss your recovery journey and just kind of what led you to be here today?
My name's Kyle Kennery. I use he, they pronouns. I went on a bit of a different journey, but ended in a similar place to Raheem, ironically. I am a youth counselor And I went to Bellwood in Toronto in October 2019. I'm just hit 3.5 years sober. And it's been a beautiful mission, but a big part of my journey was I had known that I was queer since I was young, like 12, 13. And part of living such a closeted life kind of led to parts of my addiction. And so once I found sobriety, I knew that I then needed to flip the script. And that's when I started doing bigger things. And I was fortunate enough to be able to use a sports platform and try and deliver a strong message of we are here and we are queer. And I feel like I've just been making up for lost time. And so all the years that I spent doing allyship and being involved in the community through allyship, I then got to be a direct member of the community. And so being able to be part of something like this and really, like I said, make up for lost time is it's really a beautiful thing. And now I get to see my own students and clients, and I get to see the impact firsthand every day that I get to make and the role model that I get to be.
Thank you so much, Kyle, and kudos to you on your 3-year mark. That's major. Congratulations. Kaos, would you like to introduce yourself and kind of bring us up to speed about your recovery journey as well?
For sure. My name's Jesilo. I'm also known as Kaos, which a lot of people know. I use they, them pronouns, and similar, I am 2.5 years sober, just hitting that mark as well in my recovery. I would say a lot of my life has to do with recovery and mental health and awareness. I also come from a background as a youth counselor, and I also come from working in mental health, like therapy and a few other things that I've done over the years. And I think in life, I've always just wanted to be a person that can help other people with their recovery journey, as I've been helping myself through mine and doing a lot in the community for that. So yeah, I've lucked out and got to do my side art and my passion and joy, which is drag. So I've been traveling the world probably for just over a year now, with Drag Race specifically, and showing my art, and then also getting to do a lot of discussions and panels about my recovery, my journey in my sobriety, and helping other people in the queer community with what they're doing in life too. So yeah, it's been incredible.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And kudos to you and your sobriety benchmark as well.
Thank you.
So I can open this up to the panel as well, but these conversations are so important about recovery, sobriety, mental health, addictions, and all that. Obviously, why we're hosting events such as this. So why do you think it is important to discuss sobriety and recovery as a whole?
Anyone? Should I?
I feel like everyone, whether somebody's gone through the journey of finding sobriety, whether they identify as having an addiction or not, I think that everybody in this world has had some hardship or has a cross to bear, and I think that, you know, I remember the first time not the first time, but the first day at rehab, it was this idea of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be this sore thumb and I'm going to totally stick out. And, you know, the longer that you're there, you realize that we might have different reasons that landed us there, but we all have similar stories that are kind of layered with different elements of pain and suffering. And I don't think, and maybe for some of us that manifested in substance use. However, there are many people out there where it's not substance use. Maybe it's body dysmorphia. Maybe it's more of an emotional reaction that is constantly going on with their day. So the more that we can talk about sobriety and recovery, the more that we can normalize the idea that we're human and we struggle. I think the more that people can break through stigmatisms, and we can all just be open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say in our community, like there's a lot of people who suffer with addictions, and not even just to do with alcohol and drugs. There's numerous types of addictions out there, especially body dysmorphia too. I like that you brought that up. I would say it's all throughout the world. Obviously, a lot of straight people go through as well, but I think it hits our queer community twice as hard, just because of a lot of the struggles that queer people have gone through with depression and anxiety and issues in their life, of growing up with that secret and that coming out, and just a lot of things that happen. So I do think that in the queer world, it is a lot. You see a lot more of addiction problems, and people having issues that they're trying to work and overcome. And yeah, I don't know. I think you, in our stigma and like in our queer community, there's a lot of associations that lead to drug addiction and alcohol use, and it just comes kind of territorial. I wouldn't say that's all our gay community has, but it's definitely there and it's always around you. So I think it's something that queer people always will struggle with. And I think doing things like this and having conversations about it and showing like that there's people who are sober and in recovery and helping other people is a good way to help other people who are having problems with their addiction. So
Yeah. I think so in the counseling work I do, my counseling is quite harm reduction based. And so that includes lots of possibility for abstinence-based goals, but also reduction goals. And I think one thing our community struggles with is just like imagination. Even though we're creative, we struggles with imagination when it comes to like the possibility of socializing without substances. My clients find that hard. I personally find that tough all the time. And we live in a culture that's obsessed with alcohol. For example, it goes with everything. You're sad, glass of wine. You're happy and meeting friends, cocktail. You're watching a sports game. I mean, I don't know who does that, but people watch sports, I imagine, beer, So there's like an item that goes with every event and every emotion. And I think alcohol also signals class in some way, to be able to be like, ooh, we're having this fancy bottle. Ooh, we're having this, you become this connoisseur of the fancy cocktails. And I think about it as like a way to participate in capitalism that makes you feel good. I also think about it as a vehicle in our imagination that helps with socializing, right? I even say to my own therapist, I'm like, if I didn't drink, I'm not going to be as funny. My therapist is like, you will be just fine. And I'm like, you're right. I'm pretty funny. So,
that's interesting.
It's about imagination. You know what I mean? It's like, it's hard to imagine what we would do if we don't have that social lubricant or that crutch. I also think substances help us be a different person. So when I work with guys, for example, who's struggling with crystal meth, I'm like, okay, great. You did the thing. What were you able to do? Who were you able to be? And like, oh, I had sex for this long and I met this person and I did that. And I'm like, great. So that means you can do it. So now can you do it without the substance? And I know that's a hard question, but like literally you did it. You did do it. It was you, So I think that substance served a purpose. It let you know that something is possible. Now I think the work is to figure out how you can do it in a different way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never thought about that. And like I said, we've done this like kind of conversation a couple of times, and no one's ever really brought up that like analogy with imagination and everything. And it makes sense though when you like break it down like that, where it's just like, yeah, are you able to see yourself in that different perspective or see yourself in that situation without the substance at hand? So it's an interesting perspective. And I think it's a good kind of leading question too. And I don't want to pick on you, Kaos, but being a drag performer, like a lot of the times, like substances are so inherent within the venue, the culture, the entertainment aspects. And I've interviewed performers before and they say like, I used to rely so heavily on substances just to get on stage
Oh,
or
for sure.
just
Yeah,
be involved. And so like, if you want to speak to that as an experience as a sober performer now.
for sure. I like that you brought that up because that was something I would have talked about after anyway. I still struggle with that in this line and in this career. All I do is travel, and all I do is literally live in bars every single night of my life. So daytime is like not even a thing for me anymore. And yeah, in that lifestyle, it's just everything's always around you. There's always drugs, there's always alcohol. And for me, in my experience, like drugs and alcohol were my crutch. So that's how I'd be able to do everything. So even in my drag career, like I never used to perform without doing shots or having alcohol first and loosening up. And that's something I still struggle to this day. I think being sober has completely changed me as a person and changed me as a drag performer. I used to be way more outgoing, really, really crazy. That's where I got the name Kaos. So now a lot of people who know me, they just know me as more inner chaos in my head because they're like, you're not as chaotic as you used to be. So it's kind of funny that I have the name Chaos. But I think in our community, performers, queer people, it doesn't matter, all just in the community doing social events that involve drinking and alcohol, we use that as a crutch to help us just get loose, meet people, have a good time, show ourselves more. And I still literally to this day struggle with that. And I'm still learning who I am without alcohol and without drugs because it does change you as a person. And I think that's why a lot of people are scared to live a sober life is because they don't know themselves without alcohol and drugs. And yeah, so yeah, that's all. I don't know what else to say to that, but it's definitely something that I think I will always struggle with. Everybody will always struggle with. Recovery is never ending journey. It's always refining yourself. So, but that's also the joy in it too, is seeing things in a different light and seeing yourself in a different light without the use of it. So, yeah.
Chaos, as you were talking, I was just thinking about the theme of grief that comes up a lot in
Exactly.
substance use, counseling, or even in therapy with queer people in general. Kyle, maybe you could relate to this, but like I just think so grief is our response to loss, right? And people knew you as chaotic. I'm imagining in a great way or in a wild way. And there's some mourning to be done because you're like, I'm just not that, I'm not quite that person anymore. And who am I living for? And how am I supposed to keep this up? Right. Because then people start to expect this of you. And for a lot of people, it's like loss of identity, but loss of spaces. So I think it's amazing that you're able to be sober at a bar. I do think that the culture of the bar is really hard, right? Like we're like raised in bars as queer people. And like I'm used to drag queens always being like, the more you drink, the prettier I look, or tip your bartenders. There's like so many jokes and everything's alcohol. And so it's just so embedded in the culture. And I think we're like, how will I participate in that culture or in that space if I'm not drinking? You know?
Yeah.
So grief comes out. I think about grief as a big theme.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people, when they meet me, they expect like this crazy, like over the top energy, comedy, campy queen on the mic, because that's what a lot of drag performers are. And I'm the total opposite of that. You give me a mic and I'm just blah, blah, blah. I don't even know what I'm saying. Like I can't keep a conversation. I'm more introverted than people think I am. And I think that has to do with becoming sober and like refining myself. And it's not a bad thing because I'm enjoying my sobriety journey, but it's definitely, that's what people in the gay community, especially in drag performers, are used to. They're used to like drag performers being over the top and able to make a joke every 2 seconds or come back at you with a comment after you make something. And there's lots of different forms of drag in the drag community that people need to see. And I think there's a lot more people becoming sober too and in recovery that is great for people to see and see that there's a different side to our drag performer and community. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Kyle, I'm in.
Yeah, well, two parts. I traveled for sports, and I remember the first time that I finished a game and I had to catch a red eye back, and not having beers after the game, not trying to drink as much as I could on the flight, and how different and unique that travel experience was, and just how much freer it was. It was a, I was going to the airport without a mission, or I wasn't trying to navigate what time is this bar open till, or this or that. And so there was a lot of freedoms that kind of opened up. And then even, not, outside of catching a red eye, the idea of even just the next day after a game where, post game, we would go out and we would celebrate and we'd carry on. And of course, I'd be the one that push and push and push. Let's go a little more. And then, get up for a 7:30 a.m. flight, and you're like dragging. And I remember that first flight after being like, what is this feeling? This feels too easy going to an airport. Like, is this how the rest of the world goes to airports? Crystal-eyed. So that, I think that just, it was a new experience. In terms of the idea of grief, when I had my breakup with substances, I swore that I, wasn't going to change the energetic, kind of crazy, outgoing, fun-loving person. And it was challenging. It was challenging to not become this. I thought, if I'm going to be sober, I'm going to be so freaking lame and boring, and nobody's going to want to hang out with me. And, when I go camping and all the cliff jumping, or when I, go to a bar and it's karaoke, or, oh, wait, there's a Coyote Ugly, like, chance to be dancing up on the, like, I still wanted to do all those things. And I wanted to maintain my sobriety. And it took a long time for me to ease back into that. But it is possible. And like, it's possible to be a tone deaf, terrible singer such as myself and still go to karaoke with your friends and have an absolute blast. It's possible to dance at a wedding in the center of the floor to Backstreet Boys and bring a chair out and do twirls and all sorts of crazy things, and not have regrets. And I mean, pictures will always tell the true story. So I won't say too much about the regrets, but the idea of waking up sober, going to bed sober, not feeling like you just overtook the wedding because you were completely obliterated. It's still possible to have this fun. And so I think grieving for me looked a little different. And I grieved the go all night, party hard kind of scenarios. But then I wasn't fully separating from my old self. And I think that's important for people to know that as they venture into sobriety, that you can change in so many ways, and you can also decide to hold to who your true organic self is.
That goes into what Raheem was talking about with imagination, right? Like, people aren't able to imagine those situations where I can still be the fun-loving life of the party, where, like you said, Kyle, not overtaking, but still self-aware, but again, having a blast, dancing your heart out, whatever it may be. But it's hard to see yourself in those situations because you're just so reliant on a substance to get you there.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I think it comes down to the idea of, like, how many fucks do you have to give about other people's opinions?
Yeah.
And eventually, like, the bank kind of runs out, and you just decide, like, I'm doing this for me. And whether people want to yuck my yum, if they're not on board with this train, then they're lost. But I'm gonna keep going.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it. So with this, like, obviously, given the queer experience and the queer culture, there's a heightened experience within mental health and addictions and substance use issues. So why do you think it is important to have queer specific programming or resources available to people seeking out recovery? I don't know if Raheem, you want to speak to it right off.
Well, when people reach out to me or colleagues of mine and they want a gay therapist or a queer therapist, a lot of what they're appreciating is just knowledge about our subculture. You know, like when somebody says, I have trouble having sober sex, and I'm like, yeah, I get that, you know? And there's something specific about masculinity, penis size, body image, like anxiety about performance. Some people will use substances so that they last longer. There's so many, there's things that like intuitively I just kind of know because I'm part of the community. And I think that's what people want and are looking for. Not for me or not another gay or queer therapist to like understand exactly what their experience is going to be, because we're not. But like, as one of my friends says, I don't want to have to explain to my therapist what poppers are. And I'm like, you know what? Fair. Fair. And then so Kyle alluded to this earlier, you know, the nuances of coming out, even though we live in a more accepting world now than perhaps we ever did, coming out is still a big, like hard personal journey. And all of us, you know, at some point anticipate absolute rejection. We anticipate the possibility of being disowned. We anticipate the possibility of violent homophobia and transphobia. It doesn't mean it's going to happen to all of us or that we all have awful experiences, but there's a shared collective fear, right? And then we come out into our communities and there's like new stressors, you know, like around HIV treatment, HIV prevention, HIV stigma. I don't know about your experiences, but in my world and in my circle, like of gay men, like we get STIs way more than any of our straight counterparts, which is like not a big deal, but initially it is because it brings up so much shame. You're like, oh, I'm disgusting, or like, why did I do this? Or so it takes a long time even to adjust to and decide how you want to participate in a culture that celebrates casual sex. And there's nothing wrong with that, but like it takes a minute to get your head around it, you know? So for me, I think about substance use and anxiety, depression, or mental health challenges as being like it expresses itself in a unique way because of our subculture, right? And as we talked about the bars, we talk about coming out, like all of us in this room seem to get that. And I think that's why we need to talk about it in a more nuanced way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think going off of that as well, I think as much as us queer people want to be part of everything in the world and like we're not different, like hear us out, we still are different. And there's still a lot of things that we go through that other people don't go through. And I think having a space for queer people, especially in a recovery-based thing, is something that's needed because there's so many things that even I like would want to talk about that I just don't feel comfortable just bringing up to everybody. I want to be in a queer or sober space with somebody who's going through the same issues that I am, or other things where I feel confident, comfortable to talk about those situations. So like just a funny little reference, I like to say to my friends that my life growing up was similar to Queer as Folk, like the TV show. So I went through like a lot of like fun drugs, like weird parties, things like that. There's been a lot of emotional trauma that has happened in my life and other people's life that I know. And I don't feel comfortable bringing that up to anybody on the spot. Like I want to go to a place where I can meet out other queer people and seek people who've also gone through similar situations and talk about that. So having that, there needs to be queer spaces for that. And that's why it's so important.
Absolutely. We've, like Kyle mentioned too at the beginning with coming out, it's like, we've done interviews in the past with queer alumni and they talk about their second coming out where they've come out already as gay, pansexual, bi, whatever it may be. And then they have to come out again with a substance use issue, or they have to come out again with like a mental health condition, whatever it may be. And then it's just like that added layer going back to grief and going back to just like shame and everything too associated, where there's that constant fear of just being ostracized and just being other, because it's a collective shared like emotion, I think. And like Raheem and Kaos mentioned, it's what bonds us and what kind of creates that safety and creates that welcoming environment. And I've done the same thing with like my therapist. Like I actively will seek out like a gay therapist, a gay doctor, a gay whatever it may be, dentist, but like whatever, that's just for fun. But but yeah, it's just more so to be like, there's a firm understanding already where if I'm talking to my doctor, I don't have to disclose like, the queer subculture of like sexual partners and stuff like that, where I might have a little bit above average my heterosexual counterpart, where it's
Yeah.
like talking to my family doctor growing up back in my hometown and being like, "You've had how many?" And then just like, or them being like, "No, I meant like not all time, just in the past 30 days." And I'm like, "No, I said it." But it's
Okay, Jeremy, now you're bragging. This is called humble bragging.
Yeah, just a quick name drop there, right?
Yeah, well, list apparently. So, but Kyle, would you speak to it?
I think that Raheem said the magic word, which is shame. And you know, that drives so much of addiction. The other thing that I mean, I grew up, and for me, because being queer was something that I could hide, I chose to for so many years, and that kind of was the shame. And I also grew up in a culture of hockey and lacrosse and a lot of macho bravado, strong alphas, and drinking and drugs was, you know, it was like who could drink the most, and that was a big part of our culture. Then I went and got sober, and I really, after my sobriety, was like, I am full on diving back into the queer community, like, or diving in for the first time, I should say, only to find out it's almost the identical community and vibe in terms of substance use. And it's rewarded and it's praised, and that was really challenging. It was challenging to meet people in the queer community who were also sober and who wanted to have conversations and interactions that did not revolve around substances. And I think that substance use that allows for addicts or people in general to dissociate from that shame, whether that's a shame associated with a trauma, or that's just a shame of, I can't believe I'm singing Lady Gaga in front of 20 people and I can't carry a tune in a bucket, right? No matter what level of shame it is, the idea that I can separate from that just with a couple beverages, that it really just comes down to shame. And I think that's why it's so important to be talking specifically about addiction within the queer community, because it's different. And you know, I will never know what life could have been like growing up had I made that choice when I was 13, 14. But I also get to wake up every day knowing what life is like today, and living the possibilities that I always dreamt of. And I think that's the other thing that, you know, in terms of imagining, you know, don't just imagine, but give it a try. Maybe flaunt it around a little bit and see how it feels. And if it's for you, then it's for you, and rock it with confidence.
You know, when you talked, Kyle, when you're talking about shame and what you're able to do without substances, you know, it makes me think about like the function of substance in people's lives, right? Nobody starts to use substances because they're like, you know what? I think an addiction sounds like a great thing for me to pursue. Like never, that's not a thing, right? But I think we see substances as a vehicle for lots of things. And what you described sound like social participation. But when you talk about like hockey, or I don't know what sport it was, and like beer afterward, to me, that's like, it's not just social inclusion. It's like my masculinity hinges on this, right? Like these people are going to accept me because there's something about being risk taking or being able to drink a certain amount or eat a certain amount where people are like, oh yeah, that's what a man does. And I think it expresses itself differently after we come out and we're in queer men's communities, for example. But risk taking, living on the edge, I think there's something about masculinity there. And I think we all know we live in a culture that still jokes about and shames femininity, and there's lots of femphobia. And
Yeah.
so, I think like part of our substance use collective is like to manage the shame and stigma around like being femme, or not having muscles, which are about masculinity, I think. I don't know why else people do that, but and so I think if we're going to talk about shame, we also have to think about masculinity. And if we're talking about imagination, it's imagining not just being sober, but a different kind of masculinity, one that isn't tied to risk taking, one that isn't tied to like needing to be part of like a herd mentality, one that's okay being femme or not mask or whatever it is. There's a lot of like being okay with, and that which doesn't come easily.
Well, and even just the idea, sorry, Chaos, even just the idea of like, what is mask and what is femme? Because like there's no
I'm mask.
Right?
That's a whole other conversation.
I know, but like who's sitting at the round table putting the list together of these are the masculine traits and these are the feminine traits. And but I agree with you.
Yeah.
Like I agree wholeheartedly. And it's that idea, like if I want to talk about my feelings and I want to be a good dancer that can actually move my hips, does that make me feminine? Or like so
correct.
right? Right? Or does that just make me talented and somebody that is emotionally intelligent?
Raheem, I also like that you brought up acceptance, and I think acceptance has to do with all of those in one. You want to feel accepted in being masculine, in being feminine, and I think even with substance use, a lot of people just start using substance to fit in with a group. I'm sure that's how it is for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other people. Like, I never just did drugs because I was just like, ooh, like let's do this. It was like it was just there. It was offered. It was easy. It was with a group of people that I wanted to feel accepted into and become friends with. And I think that just comes with it, and people don't see it that way all the time. A lot of people just think like, oh, you just did this, you ruined your life by doing substances or this or that. I'm like, no, I'm like, it's a normal thing that we all struggle with in our day-to-day use. So
I don't think there's a ruined life. There is a life full of history and experiences, and like maybe you regret some of it. I imagine there's probably some fabulous moments too. Like we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like I think lots of people want to alter their mind state and they want to enhance their experience. And for a portion of people, it turns into a problem, and that the proportion is higher in our community because substances are available, like they're quite available. I also think our life trajectories don't look the same as our straight counterparts, right? So like I think for straight folks, they're like, okay, we party and then we're done college, university, and then we like get a job and settle down, and we try to date and marry and then have kids and blah blah blah. Like I'm in my late 30s, and I'm like, there's like settling down is not a thing. I have to make a conscious choice to be like, you know what, your body's a bit done. Maybe you stay in tonight, and that's okay, and it's okay. You're not missing out. But it feels like a second adolescence because I'm like trying to figure out, what do I want my life to be? My body can't do, whether it's partying, drugs, whatever, or even being social. My body can't do now what it used to in its 20s, right? I got to figure out a new way to be, and that is, there isn't an exact blueprint for me in the same way that straight folks have a blueprint.
No, I think that's very fair. And then also just to kind of go off of what Kyle was mentioning too about emotional intelligence, I think, and tying that with masculinity, I think there's a huge stigma with therapy and masculinity. And then you'll see like a lot of men won't like go to therapy, or they see like, oh, you go to therapy, like that's sissy, or that's such a woman thing to do, or like, and it's often like in media, it's like the housewife that's in like disarray that goes to therapy. Like it's that very heavy stigma and like stereotype. So I think that brings up such an important point, and that ties into like the conversation about acceptance and then society definitions and all that, which I know is a much larger like conversation, but it's just like there's a huge stigma associated with men or like masculinity being vocal about feelings.
Well, let's destigmatize it or let's demystify it, right? Like,
Absolutely.
because I'm a therapist and I go to therapy. Jeremy, it sounded like you mentioned that you go to therapy.
I go to therapy.
Ki- Kyle, you're here specifically. You were talking about being in a treatment program. Like, I feel like we should just tell people what it's like or that we're doing that. So we
Yeah.
demystify it.
Well, and I'm a youth counselor that
Mm.
went to rehab, that openly talks about addiction, that talks about my experience with rehab. I deliver DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, that I was trained in, which is also what I was exposed to, and that was my therapeutic journey at Bellwood in Toronto.
Mm.
And you know, I'm sure there are people out there going, oh my God, this person who did drugs and alcohol and went off and did this and all that, he's allowed to work with youth? Yeah. Because I like, anybody can read a book. Anybody can read a book and do the tests and get all of those pieces of information. The ability to actually speak from lived experience, that's a powerful tool that, you know, not everybody has in their arsenal. And it's, I mean, I can say all the things that textbook 783 would tell me to say, or I can be really real with you and really straight up. And my experience is that I threw out rule book 783 a long time ago in terms of my day-to-day encounters with clients.
Mm-hmm.
Totally fair. Yeah, and I think going off of that, like just discussing like your own personal experiences too, I think I'd like to kind of know for Kaos and Kyle, like what made you want to get sober? Like what was that? Was there a final definitive moment where you're like, oh, this is like it? Or was it like rock bottom was like coming and you were like, oh, I'm gonna avoid it kind of thing? Like I could ask you first, Kaos, if you want to speak to it.
Sure. Well, first off, I want to say, I don't know if this is okay to say, but I have nothing against substance or drug or alcohol use. Like a lot of things I've done in my life, even through like working festivals and other things, is all about harm reduction. So I know there's still a lot of people who can use drugs to do other things in life and live a safe and normal life. I personally had a problem with it. And I think a lot of people are scared to talk to me about it or hang out with me because they just assume like, oh, you don't want to be my friend because I do drugs and drink. And that's never the case for situations. So for me personally, I was just getting to a point in my life where I was going on really bad, like full week benders and just having such bad issues where I don't even know where I was or what I was doing and blacking out. And I think the major part for me in my substance use was not even just the actual use and the partying and whatever the night itself. It's always the next day and the like 4 days of depression. And that just for me, with all my mental health and depression going on, came with suicidal thoughts and other issues. I think I come from a background of like, I didn't have family around. I'd gone through a lot of trauma. So in my use of substance, I think that brought out a lot more of my trauma. And I think it just got to a point where I literally couldn't even live. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to see anyone. It got to the point where I actually, being very real in this conversation.
Oh, absolutely.
I actually OD'd and was rushed to the hospital on multiple occasions. But the last time it happened was probably the worst. And I was pretty close to dying. And I think after that all happened, it scared me pretty bad. And that just completely changed my mind, thought on life, and whipped me into I need help. I need to seek, like, talk to people, whatever I can, and realize that I actually had a problem with addiction. And it wasn't going to go anywhere unless I did something about it. So that's how it started for me.
Yeah, I think
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, Kaos, one thing in your story that stood out for me is how substances likely began as a way to participate in a social life and be closer to people.
Yeah.
Right? Because you mentioned like the festivals and parties, but actually your substance use got to a point where you wanted to be alone. So it wasn't facilitating proximity to people. It was
exactly.
And so it wasn't serving its function animore.
Exactly.
And I think that's like a good evaluation tool. Like, is this serving the function,
Yeah.
that I wanted it to?
Another thing based off of just that you said was I go to a lot of queer programming in my recovery with a lot of other queer people, and we talk about our stories. And something that got brought up in the form of addiction is that I don't think I was ever fully just addicted to substance. I think I was, again, this came back to the same thing as acceptance. I feel like I just need to be accepted in a group and accepted, even accepting myself too. And I feel like substance use came from that. And I feel like even now being sober and clean, we all like seek acceptance, and I seek acceptance in other things and other addictions. So I feel like it's just something that has always been a struggle. And that's what I used to also think it was, just that, bringing up what you just said. And I was like, I always just wanted to feel loved, accepted, fear of FOMO, always being around groups of people.
Yeah.
And then I think when I first realized that my addictions were getting even worse and bad, it was when I realized when I was just sitting at home alone and still using substance and still going through the depression and issues, and realizing that it wasn't just that. There's also underlying issues with myself that I just needed to work on. So I love that you also brought that up, because that's a big factor. I think people always think it is just to do with big groups and other things, and there's both sides of it. So
Absolutely. Kyle, would you like to speak to your sobriety journey?
What if I said no? No, I'm just kidding. I just wanted to throw the curveball. Okay. I am in alliance with Kaos in terms of, I am not anti-drugs or anti-alcohol. I'm just anti-me using drugs or alcohol, because I don't know how some people just have a beer after work. That is a concept that baffles me. The idea of having one is like, okay, so we're starting this thing up, right? Like, let's go. Okay. Yeah. 1, 2, 10, 20. The idea of, just using a substance, that's that one special party, that happened that year. That's so foreign. And I think that was, that was a component of me realizing that I was an addict. I think the other part, and Kaos kind of mentioned this and touched on it, was the idea that I got to a point where I was using substances because I had to. I didn't even want to anymore. It was part of routine. It was part of, I was using uppers to battle downers. I was using downers to battle uppers, and it was this concoction I had created to manage mental health. It was a never-ending vicious cycle that was just so tumultuous. I couldn't get out of it. And I also appreciate, somebody in rehab, I said to somebody, like, some days I don't feel like I should even be here. It was like, I don't know, week 2 or week 3. I was like, some days I feel like I shouldn't even be here. Like, I've never been arrested. I never went to jail. I don't have warrants out, or blah, 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 all these things. And they, like, very simply put it, like, some people crash into the rock bottom, and some people just float down like an effortless feather. But one way or another, you end up at your rock bottom. And it's not, back to the idea of masculinity. It's not how terrible can I make my life before I seek out intervention. It's how much quicker do I want to get to a healthier lifestyle, because this lifestyle is not working. And I think that was, something that's really stuck with me, and that idea that there are people out there who may listen to this, who may read an article and think, oh, it's not that bad. It doesn't have to be that bad. You can choose a different path. If you recognize that you're in that cycle and you want out, you can choose that path. You don't have to wait for the OD. And that's not a judgment or a shame or anything. Of course, it's just, I think people need permission to intervene and self-advocate, and know that there are alternatives. So that I don't know. I don't even know what the original question was. I'm just up here on my soapbox letting her go.
No, thank you. I really appreciate you giving us insight. I appreciate that, Kyle. Thank you. Then going off of this too, like just in general with sobriety and recovery, what would be like a big piece of advice you would give to someone contemplating going sober? So Raheem, I don't know if you would like to kick us off.
Sure. I think accountability is a really big thing. So being able to tell somebody and confide in somebody who's there with you and not going to judge you. So if you're like, I think I have a problem with drinking, or this cocaine is getting out of hand, or whatever it is, you want them to kind of keep you accountable, but also not tell you what to do or not judge you if you do choose to use. And I think having good people in your life is really important. And it's also really important to, if you're going to have those good people, then to be honest with them. Because what often happens with people is that they'll tell a few people, but they'll make a goal that might be a bit premature or it's just too bold. And then they feel ashamed when they can't follow through on it. So then they'll avoid their confidants. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to alienate yourself from the people who you've initially decided are going to be there to support you. And I think for a lot of queer guys in particular, one of the biggest things that we talk about in therapy is like, when you're ready, we have to talk about what dating apps, in-person dating, and sex is going to look like. Like, when are you going to talk about the role of substances in your past? When, like, we're going to have to talk. There's going to be new kinds of anxiety. Sure, we all have some anxiety, but there's going to be new kinds of anxiety. What is it going to mean to stay present? How are you going to manage if you don't feel amazing in those experiences? And I think we have to anticipate a lot of that, because you're reshaping your brain to participate in the world in a different way. So for me, it's like the honesty and preparation for what this new life is going to be, and like giving yourself many attempts to get there.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I would say my two biggest things too are accountability and outreaching. I think that it's very, very, very hard to do, but you have to admit to yourself that you need help and that you have struggles in life. And it's gonna come and go. Like, you're gonna want to do it, you're not gonna want to do it. But if you really are a person who thinks that you are struggling with this and addiction and substance use, I think a lot of people get to that point where they just realize they need to seek help and reach out. I think accepting the problem, and that's perfectly why we're even having conversations about this right now, is there needs to be outreach. There needs to be more programming, more things that people don't feel as scared or uncomfortable to realize that this is there, and there's a lot of other people going through it. So that's a big thing. And I think we are getting along the line in life where there is enough queer programming in I'd say most of Canada too, that you can find help where you need. And there's always somebody around. There's always somebody, especially in the bars. There's usually always one person who's sober or a few. So make friends with people around you who are also sober. That's a huge thing. So if you want to get help, there's always somebody there that you can just become friends with that is also going through the same struggles as you. So I think for me, that was my biggest thing, is accepting that I had a problem and then seeking out and realizing that there's other people going through the same issues as me. So
yeah, I think that people, when they're having some of those internal dialogues, and they're like, maybe I'm an addict, maybe this is too much, I don't know about sobriety, I would suggest people take really tiny baby steps. And if this is you and you're having that thought, and you're not ready to part way with addiction, but you're also feeling like you're conflicted and being torn apart from the inside out, go to a meeting, do a virtual meeting, and keep your camera off, like, and listen to other addicts, because what I can guarantee you is that you're not the only one. There are so many people who are just the same as you, there are so many people who are living the same experiences, who lived the same experience, who made all the same terrible mistakes, and then they just might be a couple steps ahead in terms of discovering all the new wonderful things, but you're not alone. And I think that's the thing with stigmatism, is because of a stigmatism, nobody talks about it. So we all feel isolated. And the more isolated we feel, the more we feel shame. And the more shame, then let's go and numb that pain with substances. So go sit in a meeting. Like, do it virtually. It's the world of Zoom. Look what we're doing right now from all across Canada, right? Go sit on a meeting and listen. You don't have to say shit. Just sit there and listen and experience. And maybe it's for you and maybe it's not. But even before you make that decision to try and get sober or explore, hear what people have to say, because those rooms are not, it's not what media portrays it to be, you know, a bunch of 70-year-old men talking about, well, back in my day, and we do the sober thing and all this and that. And, you know, it's like-minded people from all different walks of life, who are there for one common goal, and it's to find health and happiness. So check it out. And you can find it on the Google web. It's pretty easy.
I think touched on that too earlier. What Raheem said as well is a lot of people are like scared. Like, let's say go to a meeting or a program or something, and a lot of people are scared they'll come once and then they'll either relapse or have a day, and then they'll be like, well, I'm not accepted into this because I'm a person who can't stay sober. But if you come to any meeting or do anything involved in substance use, you'll know that we all go through that. And everybody struggles with relapse or having issues where they went clean and then used again, and then et cetera. And you'll realize that it's more accepting than you actually think. And there's a big stigma with that. And I think that's what scares people away from programming as well, and reaching out. But if you actually talk to somebody and reach out to other people, and exactly that, go to a meeting, even just sit in a Zoom, even if you're with your camera off, you'll hear probably that somebody has a very similar struggle that you do as well, and is also going through that.
Absolutely. And one thing I joke about, but it's not really a joke, it's kind of serious, is our problem is often maintained by a very simple kind of narcissism, right? We tell ourselves that our problem is unique and that nobody else is going to get us. And like, that's a useful lie to tell yourself, because it allows you to keep partying. You know, so like it functions very well. But as you said, Kyle, it's like a painful reality sometimes to be like, oh, I'm not that unique. Other people experience this too. It's like painful, but also less isolating when you're in that space.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a very fair point.
Yeah, you're right. It is isolating, but then it kind of goes back to the idea, and we talked about it earlier, that we all want to fit in. And so taking those first steps is truly an opportunity to fit in just with a new culture, and with new like-minded folk. And I think that, you know, we've all been around people who embrace us for good and for bad, and people who have said, yeah, you should have another one. Yeah, you should do some more. And so when we surround ourselves with, you know, a different group, and we're with like-minded people who say, no, you can do this, and it's okay that you relapse, and we're happy that you came back. We're not mad. We're not mad that you relapsed. Oh, talk to Joel over there. Right? We're happy you came back. Way to get back here. 1 day sober. That's the hardest day. And exactly. So I think it's, you know, there's just a different group to become welcomed into.
The exact fact of the point that you relapsed and then still came back and reached out means that it's in your head that you know that you're still seeking that and wanting help, and you're needing this. So you should never feel ashamed about relapsing, because it just, especially if you are coming back, because you just know that you're in the right mindset going towards the right direction. So
For sure. So a lot of people who are attending today are clinicians. So they're going to be frontline workers dealing with people actively seeking out treatment for recovery. So what would be a way, or like, I guess, a tip, resource, whatever you feel, that a clinician can make a program or treatment modality or space even more safe and inclusive for queer folks? It's a very large question, but
I mean, when I work with people, when I work with people who like they have a different life experience than me, even if they are queer, sometimes the way I ask it is like, I'm like, tell me, you're talking about this party, you're talking about this fight, you're talking about this trip, you're talking about this brand that you love or this shopping you do. Tell me about what that means. Like, what is that all about in your world? Right? Because people like ascribe meaning to things in ways we're not going to get. And I think we have to ask, like, what does that mean in your world? You know? So somebody who says like, I'm going to 3 days of circuit parties during Pride. Like, I do know what that means. But if you don't, you could be like, tell me about that. Like, what is that? What does that mean in your world? And is that more or similar to other people? And what goes on there? And does it feel great? And what part of it doesn't feel so great? You know, I think we need to ask some important questions. I also think that it's useful if service providers can appreciate like that a lot of queer people are going to do relationships differently, like romantic relationships differently. I think our whole landscape of connection seeking is it's a bit different than I think our straight counterparts. Our relationship to substances is going to be a bit different. And I caution clinicians who sometimes lump substance addiction and sex addiction together, because I think they sometimes evaluate both things as compulsive, and they're not necessarily. So as we're treating substances, let's remember to also be sex positive.
That's great advice.
I would say for the clinicians who are listening to this that it's okay to not know and it's okay to not understand. I'm somebody who I'm only like 4 years into being part of the community officially. And so, and when in my active addiction days, I was doing that within a very heteronormative environment, or not heteronormative, like a very heterosexual environment. It was a lot of partying with guys and like teammates and buddies, and it wasn't the parties, and it wasn't the I'm trying to find the right words while trying to maintain a little bit of PG, but it was very different. And so I still don't fully know and understand, and it's okay to not fully know and understand. But being authentically and genuinely curious and taking the time to ask that question, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of, I want to know and I want to understand and help me understand. I think that's what's so important. I think the idea that we can be vulnerable and somebody is going to take the time to listen and try and understand us. I think that is a really powerful thing. That would be kind of my 2 cents on it.
Thank you.
I love that. I would also add to it though, because what you spoke to so beautifully is what a lot of people would call internalized homophobia, or the experience of exclusion when you're in a space where you're the minority, right? And so I'm imagining you with all these like dude bros and like the drinking or the carrying on. It helps you get close to them. Well, why do you want to get close to them? Because we're terrified that we'll be rejected by them if they knew the real me, right? And so we're struggling with self-acceptance, not sure that they will accept us. And so in that instance, like the substance use or the alcohol use is a function of like homophobia in your environment or your own sense of like, am I good enough?
I completely agree with everything that was just said. On top of that, I would also say probably people need to realize that, yes, like you might be different or you might have gone through things that you think no one else has gone through. Being realistic in life is there's probably somebody who's gone through something very similar to you. It might not be exactly the same, but it's very similar. So in listening to things like this, and what I can say to us is, don't be scared to reach out. There's so many people who go through the same issues that you do or similar. And in borderlining of it is a lot of it has to do with mental health. A lot of it has to do with interlining traumas and ways you've grown up. It doesn't even matter just if you're queer. I think it's just that's a form of something we use because of a lot of queer traumas that have happened. But there's also a lot of things that come with that in growing up that people go through. So I think in talking to even just people like us, you'll hear that a lot of us have gone through similar situations. So I think like listening to something like this, and that's what you can get out of this, is hearing that we still struggle as well. Like I think addiction will always be a struggle. Substance use will always be a struggle. Even if you are clean and sober, you still think about it. It's still an issue. It never goes away. So hearing from other people, hearing other people's stories, and just seeing how they stop themselves from that and move on and move forward with it, and realizing that there's so much better in life than just that is a great thing. So yeah.
Really agree. Well,
Yeah.
with that, we come to our time. So I want to thank you all for your lovely insight, expertise, and experience to contribute to today's Fierce and Sober panel. So again, thank you so much for all of your time and for your lovely answers. Wow, thank you so much again to all the panelists for their participation today and sharing their queer perspectives on sobriety and recovery, because that was kind of the point of the session. I hope it was just as insightful for everybody out there as it was for me. I know I learned so much, and I have so much respect for the folks that were able to join me today. And to everyone out there, thank you so much for kicking off your Pride Month with me and with the EHN. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, I will be sending out a copy of the recording as well as some additional resources. And of course, your CEU certificate sometime mid to late next week. But until then, happy Pride, and thank you so much. We'll see you all soon. Take care.